expect rewatches to far exceed the original watches based on the strategy I'm going to be presenting today. And so, and I can go into that a little bit now. So let me see here. Okay, so again, deciding on the start point. So in this case, let's say we're going to start with a webinar, but theoretically you could start with whatever. And for those of you who say, oh, well, we don't put out that many webinars. Well, you probably did a webinar a week ago that may still be relevant. So look at your content and focus on maybe the top 20%, things that based on your Google Analytics numbers, or things that would be good evergreen content. So things that might have value moving forward. Those are the other criteria that we use. But for this case, let's say we're planning a webinar and we want to amplify its effectiveness. So repurposing from an hour-long webinar, this kind of, we talk a little bit about here. We start from a webinar podcast, then we're going to go to replays. I'm going to go a little bit during this presentation. We create mini videos, and I'll show you how we did that. That seems to really jack up the numbers quite a bit, because a lot of members who may not be interested in sitting in an hour-long webinar will be definitely watching a full 10-minute segment. Reposts, quote cards, so forth. And then finally taking that webinar and creating long-form content. Another phrase for it is called pillar content, a lot of you are familiar with. And then that would turn into things like the white paper and then and all of that. So that gives you kind of a 30,000-foot view of what the process is of amplifying a webinar into multiple pieces of content that can satisfy your content needs for probably a month, which is one webinar. So the webinar priorities also is really important. I mean, Susanna, we were talking about webinar platforms a little bit today, and I've gotten emails and questions from some of you who have asked about what webinar platform to use. We did Webinar Jam for a bit. It worked great, but we had too many complaints in terms of people just weren't used to it because everybody was on Zoom, right? So I tried to pivot to that. We tried GoToWebinar a few times. I did some investigating on Google Meet, but in the end, we came back down to Zoom webinars. So if you get a Zoom account, you need to upgrade to the webinar account, and it could be for up to 500, which is what I would recommend. It comes out to about $140 a month through Zoom. A little bit less than that, I think it's a lot cheaper, but it depends on what you want to do for the webinar. But the things that you need to look for, again, there's many platforms out there, so it's not just Zoom, but this is based on our own use. The reliability of the platform is super important. It's got to be reasonable cost. There are some webinars platforms there. I think GoToWebinar is one of those. Could be extremely expensive. Seamless recording, high quality recording, extremely essential. Attendee seat limits. People forget sometimes when they sign up for a webinar account, they don't factor in the seat limits. Sometimes they don't even factor in the panelist limits. So if you're going to have 5, 10 people from different agencies that want to do a virtual town hall, you got to factor that in. Another one that we realized, which is why I switched from Webinar Jam to Zoom Webinar, was the level of adoption. Members just were more comfortable with it. Plus, they could call in if they wanted to, and the ease of implementation and use. I mean, everybody uses Zoom.